I'll start just because my last name begins with a B. Welcome to the Accountability Implementation Board Nominating Committee. We're going to start off by introducing ourselves. I'm Cheryl Boast. I'm a 4th and 5th grade teacher from Baltimore County, and I'm proudly serving as the president for the Maryland State Education Association and honored to be selected by Speaker Adrian Jones to serve on the committee.
Good afternoon. I am Francesca Brown. I'm the proud principal of Woodmore Elementary School in Baltimore County. And I too was selected by Speaker Jones, and I am proud to serve on this committee. Thanks so much.
And I am Dr. Rose Lee. I am a small business owner and president of Rose Lee and Associates. We do a lot of professional support services for research-centric organizations doing program evaluation and analytics. I finished a term on the State Board of Education recently and am delighted to have been nominated by Governor Hogan to be on this nominating committee. I also chair the State Commission on Aging. Thank you.
Great. I'm State Senator Paul Pinsky. I chair the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee in Annapolis. I've been in the field of education for over 40 years, from teaching to representing teachers to doing technical assistance to a number of southern states on teacher quality. So I'm pleased to be serving on the nominating committee as well.
Hi, I'm Ed Root. Okay, you're getting me. Okay, I'm Ed Root. I'm appointed by the governor, Larry Hogan. I was on the faculty and administration at Frostburg for 47 years. I was the dean of the College of Education. I served on the Maryland State Board of Education, was president 4 years. And I've served on the Allegheny County Board of Education for 7 years. I'm retired and tired.
Good afternoon. I'm Shanesha Sauls. I am the president and CEO of the Baltimore Community Foundation. I previously served as a high school English teacher, a college professor, and I served in a former life as the chair of the Baltimore City School Board. I was appointed by Senate President Bill Ferguson.
Great. I think now we have to select an acting chair, and I put forth a motion for Dr. Sauls to serve as our acting chair.
I'll second.
Is there any objection?
I have a concern about one item in the bylaws that wasn't there when I looked at it last Thursday.
Dr. Root, I think Ms. Boast was asking if there was an objection to having Dr. Sauls act as the acting chair until we elect the chair.
Okay, that's fine. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, seeing no objection, as a parliamentary procedure person, I think we're good. So Dr. Sauls, you're the acting chair as long as you're willing to do so.
Thank you. I'm happy and humbled to accept the nomination and the confidence of this august body. We have an important task ahead of us, and it's a tremendous opportunity for us to be proud of fully funding schools for students, families, and staff. And we have the important opportunity to submit the names to the governor, who will provide the appropriate level of oversight to make sure that we can all be proud of this significant investment. I would like to defer to all of you just to give some opening remarks, brief, if you don't mind, 15 seconds. Or
wait, should we first vote? Don't we all have to vote to?
As long as there's no objection, we're okay to move forward, Rose.
Although if there is an objection, I will happily give the space. Great, wonderful. So I'm not sure if anyone wants to give any other remarks. We can do it popcorn style. I do still remember what that means. Otherwise, we can go right into the agenda.
I would just like to say that I think this is a very important job that we have to appoint an oversight board for accountability and implementation of the blueprint. I know educators, parents in our communities are thrilled at the passage of the blueprint for Maryland's future to fund our schools, infuse needed programs, pre-K expansion, career technology expansion, and many other items that are outlined. And we're just so thrilled that it's being put forth. And now the key will be making sure we put the right people in place to make sure that the money actually goes to the programs and the students and communities that need this investment in public education in the coming years, so we can continue to grow our strength as a strong public education system here in the state of Maryland. So I'm thrilled to be working with all of you to make sure we put the right people in place.
Like an efficient body. So hearing no other indications, I'll move on. So the second order of business is for us to review and then adopt our bylaws. I am going to ask a member of our staff that is supporting our efforts to please support the explanation of the proposed bylaws for our committee.
Good afternoon, committee members. I think everybody has a copy of the draft bylaws. Do you prefer to go through them, or do you prefer to just talk about various sections that you wish to address concerns?
I think just for the benefit of the public, we should probably give just a high-level overview of the major points, not exhaustive, and then we can accept any questions from the committee if that's okay. Ms. Goodman.
Okay. So these bylaws, these draft bylaws, essentially because the statute is pretty silent or sparse as to the details of organization of this committee, these would give an organization. So it has the name, it specifies the purpose for which this committee has been created. And essentially that purpose is to timely, impartially, and equitably seek, select, and nominate for appointment by the governor qualified individuals to serve on the Accountability and Implementation Board in accordance with the Section 5402 of the Education Article of the Maryland Annotated Code. It specifies membership and the collective knowledge that each of the members of the committee is to have, which includes education policy from early childhood to post-secondary, collective knowledge of education strategies used by top performing state and national systems in the world, experience in systemic changes in complex organizations, and financial auditing and accounting. There was no term specified in statute. Typically for boards of education and other such committees in the education environment, terms begin in the middle of July to give notice to the public for school year starting in September. So the proposed bylaw is that the term of each member begins on July 1st of the year of appointment and terminate on June 30th. The statute does specify that each term is 5 years of members of the nominating committee. And then the term of the initial members, each of you, would be June 30th, or would terminate on June 30th, 2026, even though that's not specified. Further, in order to be consistent with the law for the AIB, the provisions on vacancies, compensation is exactly the same, meaning the members of this committee receive no compensation, but they can be reimbursed for travel and other expenses. The most important part, I think, is that voting is important in this committee. Each member only gets one vote, and it cannot be exercised by proxy. On page 5 of the draft bylaws, it specifies the duties and powers of the committee members. Further on page 5, there's a discussion of committee officers. Again, nothing is specified in statute, but in order to run efficient meetings, it's been determined that the draft bylaws would say there is a chair and a vice chair, and that the term of their office would be 1 year. Officers could be reelected. Officer duties are further specified. Essentially, the chair sets the agenda, discusses with staff, presides at meetings, provides notice and acts as an official spokesperson, and the vice chair would perform those duties of the chair if the chair is unavailable or absent. Meeting requirements, essentially the committee gets to decide, but they should have regular scheduled meetings. If they have business before the committee, they get to decide the time and place and provide notice and publication of all materials. A majority of the committee is a quorum. That would be 4 of the 6 members, and an action by the committee requires an affirmative vote of the majority. Public participation. Again, the committee will decide how the public will participate within the parameters of the Maryland Open Meetings Act and the Maryland Public Information Act. Otherwise, the committee is subject to the Open Meetings Act, and that means all business that is not put forth in an exception has to be conducted in public. We're going to go over more specifically some of the limitations of the Open Meetings Act and the Public Information Act on the conduct of the business of this committee a little bit later in the agenda. The statute does require for nominations by the committee that it be done by majority vote, and a vote cast in the majority by at least one of the 2 members appointed by the governor, president of the Senate, and the speaker of the House of Delegates, respectively.
Stacey, may I question the rationale for that? It was not in there last Thursday.
Yes, this provision under page 7 and top of page 8 about voting, yes, that was in there last Thursday.
The provision of a vote by a majority by at least one of the 2 members appointed by the governor, president of the Senate, and the speaker of the House was in there?
Yes, because that's in statute.
I must have missed it, because what that does is permit 2 people to veto 4 people.
Well, that's a provision in section 5-403 of the statute. So that is a requirement by law that the committee conduct its business.
So that was written into the law, the statute?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Sauls, if I could jump in here for a minute. Is that okay? Yeah, Dr. Root, actually one person. In other words, there has to be at least one affirmative vote from the 3 different branches, not branches, but 3 different representatives. So yes, if 2 don't support it from one of the representatives, that does work as a block. And I have to say, in the spirit of bipartisanship, and there was some concern of potentially people from one party forcing a candidate, an ideological candidate, down the throat of the other party. I proposed in the Kerwin Commission that there be a check and a balance, essentially, that we needed to work towards and seek consensus, and to move this away from partisan or ideological grounds to get the most competent people who are committed to and would enforce the blueprint for Maryland's future. So that was the thinking behind it, so it wouldn't be seen as some kind of power play.
Okay, that answers my question. I understand what you just said, and given those circumstances, I don't object. But I would point out it does allow 2 people to block 4 people. But if that was done by intent, then I'm not here to question it.
If you're ready for me to proceed, I'll finish up here. So another provision in statute as a requirement of this committee is that the committee forward 9 names for its initial slate of members of the AIB, even though there's 7 slots. And for each vacancy, this committee would be responsible for at least providing 2 names for each vacant position on the board. And those go to the governor, and the governor makes the final appointment. There are provisions in the draft bylaws, again on page 8 under Article 7 for notice. There's notice requirements about how writings of the committee can be communicated to individuals and dates, publication of meeting notices, This provision would require the committee, again, to provide notice of all of its meetings, where those notices may be provided, and it allows the committee to determine other places to provide that notice. The committee is subject to the Maryland Public Ethics Law, which again will be discussed later in the agenda, but there's provisions in here about members providing to the other committee members notice if they have conflicts of interest, and if a member has a conflict and they have to recuse themselves, and what their responsibilities are, and that they shall be counted for purposes of establishing a quorum, even if they can't vote or discuss. Confidentiality, again, this will be further explained on the agenda, but almost all of the materials sent to the committee will be confidential and will not be permitted under law to be discussed or disseminated. Any requests for disclosure of these documents will be forwarded to the chair and the committee. And finally, on page 10, amendments. If the committee wishes to amend the bylaws at a later date, then the committee just has to propose them and then take a vote. It says 2/3, but again, a majority is 4/6, and that 2/3 is also 4/6. So depending on how you wish to word that you may wish to change that. So that is a quick overview of what's in the draft bylaws.
Great, thank you. That was perfect. Before I entertain a motion to accept, are there any clarifying questions from members of the committee?
I have a question. I don't know if it's a clarifying question, but I wanted to raise a couple of questions that we might discuss. Should I do that now, or does that happen after?
So I am not a parliamentarian, nor is my parliamentary procedure. So I think it's perfectly appropriate to discuss it now, but we will be sure to properly observe the motions at the right time. Go for it.
Okay. Okay. So one of the issues that I observed was this issue about calling for subcommittees. It's just my observation that we only have 6 members on this committee, and I wasn't clear why we would need subcommittees. Maybe there is some other issue, but I thought everybody on the committee are dedicated to doing the job at hand, which is very narrowly prescribed as far as I can tell, which is to come up with the list of people. And I would hate to have kind of a subgroup doing a lot of the work and basically presenting it to the rest of us to vote. So I guess I wasn't clear what the purpose of the subcommittees was envisioned. It was not mentioned in the legislation as far as I could tell. And if there's a good reason, and I don't, tell me what it is, and maybe we could just have comma if required call for the appointment of subcommittees, because it's not obvious to me that we need subcommittees. And just in terms of board management, it often ends up kind of segregating the decision makers from the rest of the non-subcommittee members. Does that make sense? What my concern is?
If I could, Madam Chair, look, I'm fine with the clarification. We can ask one of the staff members. I don't believe that requires there be subcommittees. That is an authority they have if needed. I think that's implicit, but if you want to clarify it, I have no objection personally.
Okay, so that's fine. The second issue I wanted to raise is Senator Pinsky, you had a very coherent, clear explanation of the voting and to steer it away from political kind of ideology. And I was hoping that perhaps the other votes for other equally important decisions made by the committee might also be considered to be subject to that rule, because otherwise it could be something pushed through because of ideological background. I was just thinking if it's good enough for, and the reasoning behind it was sound for picking the people that are going to be on the nomination candidate list, could we not consider that for the decisions, the other decisions that are going to be made? And the other observation I would make is that since there's 6 people, a majority is 4. 2/3 is also 4. So is it possible to have consistent language and just continue, consistently refer to it as a majority, which is 4, which is 2/3?
Through the chair, my question is, what other items of business do you see fitting into this, Rose?
There were a couple of different places where decisions were discussed and how to vote, and it was always either majority vote or 2/3 vote. And I can point specifically to election of officers, quorum, and amendments of bylaws. So all those 3 key decisions, I was just proposing that could we use the same process as we use for nominations themselves. I do not believe that approval would be withheld unreasonably. I think all of us want to make this, move forward, but I feel like it could be a useful check for the reasons that Senator Pinsky mentioned earlier.
Are there any comments or concerns?
Yeah, I have to say, your first proposal about if needed, I'm fine with Dr. Lee. Our final decision is forwarding names. That is really our purpose. I mean, adding more criteria, it concerns me that it's actually raising more partisan issues than it's resolving. So I think the legislature spoke by designated that one area, which is our ultimate charge. I think micromanaging the bylaws to put other checks and balances is really not where we should be spending our time. So anyway.
Okay, it's just that it seems like we're just making up the bylaws de novo. And I was just trying to apply the same philosophy that ensures a bipartisan approach.
Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns about either of Dr. Lee's suggestions?
I'm in agreement with the as needed could be added in there. So it's not just implied, but it's clearly stated. I don't think we need such specificity with our voting, in my opinion, in the bylaws. I mean, we can right now make changes to the bylaws if we as a body see fit and vote on that.
Okay, and the other little, not a significant issue is also to be consistent in the language, because a majority and 2/3 is actually the same thing. Or is there some reason that we have to use 2/3? It's just.
So what little I do know, I think I can be helpful here. What little I do know about parliamentary procedure is that changes to bylaws typically do require 2/3. So it's probably just the strict application of what you would typically see in bylaws. We just happen to have the strange feature that there's 6 members. So I think I can be helpful there. And based on the nods, it sounds like I'm accurate. Dr. Lee, I think you bring up a good point. I think we should hear from Dr. Root just to make sure that we've heard a number of perspectives on this. And then I will obviously defer to Principal Brown.
Would you mind repeating that again? My screen was giving me some trouble.
Oh, absolutely. So there are 2 issues raised. One seems immaterial or non-controversial. So if it's okay, I will focus on the second and then ask you to comment on that one. So it is whether or not the rule in the statute regarding the votes required for the slate to be submitted to the governor, that is at least 1 appointee from each of the 3 elected officials have to agree in order for it to be approved for submission, that we use that same standard for all votes of this body. is Dr. Lee's proposal. Senator Pinsky and Ms. Bost have suggested that that may hamstring the process. Dr. Lee is looking for consistency, and I am curious about your perspective.
I haven't thought about it. I'm not sure, other than nominees, what we will be voting on that would be of significant importance. If it were something that is truly significant, and that is the rule that was in the law for approval of the nominees, then maybe it's something we should consider. But for trivial things, I think that would be overkill.
Thank you. And then the first change that, again, is uncontroversial is whether or not subcommittees are as needed. And based on the interpretation, we could include as needed, but it would be, it would not fundamentally change the language of the bylaws. I'm assuming you don't have a comment about that one, but if you do, Dr. Root, please.
I haven't given any thought. It did occur to me when I saw that we can form subcommittees. There may be a point when we're doing screening or something where a subcommittee might be useful, but for right now, I just don't see the need for a subcommittee.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Campbell Brown?
Yeah, I was going to say that I do, with the subcommittee piece, I think as needed language can certainly help, but of course I believe that it's already somewhat implied. And so yes, we can put in as needed. I'm okay with that. In terms of the voting and how that is set up, I do believe that our job is to select the committee. And so I don't want to get too involved with the bylaw pieces, because I think that that's going to hamper what we need to do moving forward in a timely manner.
Dr. Lee, I believe I cut you off. Did you have a response?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I totally agree that in most cases, I wouldn't expect this to be an issue, but it's in those rare cases when something substantial comes up and I can't foresee what that is. And that's why I pay so much attention to process, because I just worry that maybe there will be something that comes up and it becomes a partisan thing and it will get pushed through regardless of seeking consensus. I am totally a supporter of getting consensus because I feel that that requires us to persuade each other for our positions. So that's my reason for bringing it up. It's not because of things that are obvious and that we would never think it's a problem. It's only when there is an issue that I will regret not having a little bit of extra courtesy. So that's all.
I think that's fair. I'm inclined to agree with you, except for two caveats, if I can be frank. I think first, the time constraints that we have may not permit us to do a lot of vote counting based on a very strident rule. And I think two, the most important decision that we are accountable for as a committee is the slate of nominees. And I too like the coalition requirement that's embedded into that vote. So while I am actually inclined to agree, if we had more time, I probably would. I would be in your corner, Dr. Lee. But I think just given where we are, I would not support the changes as a member of the committee. Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to move then the bylaws with the change as needed with the subcommittees.
Thank you, Ms. Post. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Pinsky. Is there any further debate? Concerns? Seeing none, if it's okay, I just want to take the vote. So all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes and we are official. That was an important piece of business. And so thank you all for indulging in taking a little bit more time in that discussion. Our second order of business is to elect officers for the committee. And for our officers, per the bylaws, we would elect both a chair and a vice chair, both of whom would serve one-year terms. So the floor is open for nominations.
If I could, I'd like to forward the nomination of Dr. Sauls. You've proven more than worthy in the last 15 or 20 minutes. I would like to put your name forward as chair of the nominating committee.
I second that nomination.
Thank you both. Are there any other nominations for chair? If it's okay, I think we should vote on chair first and then vice chair. Is that okay? Okay. So seeing none, I'd like to take the vote. Just force of habit, all those in favor of the chair nominee as Dr. Sauls, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. And any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. I really appreciate the vote of confidence. Thank you all. Are there any nominations for the vice chair position?
I would like to nominate Paul Pinsky as the vice chair.
Is there a second?
I second that nomination.
The motion is seconded by Principal Brown. Are there any other nominations?
May I ask if I just wonder if it makes sense to have the chair and vice chair come from different segments, but maybe it doesn't matter. Cheryl, oh, sorry.
In my opinion, on this, I don't think it matters because these are two people who are going to help facilitate our meetings. All of our votes are still equal within the committee. So this is just to help facilitate working with our DLS staff and gathering us together, but the votes are all still equal.
If the nominating committee wished, I would happily step aside. Again, I would echo what Ms. Bose said, that it's coordination more than leadership. I think with people, the chair may have some sway. I obviously can offer some institutional memory, but I can do that as a regular member or as a backup to Dr. Sauls. So whatever the wish of the body is.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that.
Seeing none, no other nominations. The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. And now we've completed the second order of business, and that is to elect a chair and a vice chair who will serve for a period of 1 year. Yes, Ms. Bost.
I just want to say thank you to both of you for taking on those roles. We appreciate it.
Our next item of important housekeeping is to review the Open Meetings Act, the Public Information Act, as well as ethics requirements for this committee. And again, I defer to staff to give that presentation. Or maybe I do not defer staff to give that presentation.
I think we can't see each other, and so we're kind of not sure we had decided who would do this part of the. Okay, so I've been told that it's going to be me. So here we go. The Open Meetings Act. The nominating committee is subject to the Maryland Open Meetings Act. This is in Title III, Subtitle. It's in Title III, Subtitle 3 of the General Provisions article. The Act requires all business to be conducted in public unless the business before the committee is accepted under Section 3-305B of the General Provisions article. This, in particular to this committee, the business falls within the exception in 30305B1, which is considered the personnel exception. This exception authorizes discussion of various personnel actions in closed session. The committee would be required to announce at a public meeting that it's closing a session. It requires a vote of the committee members. Further, at least one, and probably two of the members of the committee have to take the Open Meetings Act training in order to proceed and attend the meetings in which it intends to close the meetings. We do have some language prepared for which the chair will read to give the public notice of what's required or what the committee is doing in executive session, and the committee may discuss only matters that are within this exception in that closed meeting. The committee will comply with the law by keeping minutes. Those minutes are sealed, but there is a vote required before the committee can go into closed session. So it'll be amongst the committee members to decide who should be taking the open meetings training. Further, the committee is subject to the Maryland Public Information Act. The Public Information Act states, except as otherwise provided by law, a custodian shall permit a person or governmental unit to inspect any public record at any reasonable time. However, a custodian shall deny inspection of personnel record of any individual, including an applicant. So the opinions of the Attorney General have consistently advised that personnel provision is not limited to personnel records of state employees, but also applies to records relating to elected and appointed officials, including members of advisory boards. This board has determined to be an advisory board, and essentially its entire business is to evaluate candidates for selection to the AIB. Therefore, almost all of the business of this committee falls within that exception. And so the majority of the business conducted by the nominating committee will be done in either closed or executive session. The committee has further been advised that it may not disclose records relating to the names of applicants, evaluations of applicant fitness for the job, information gathered to evaluate an applicant's fitness, or biographical information or letters of reference. Therefore, people can ask for, but will likely deny any request for the names or lists of nominees or possible candidates. We will not release the applications. We won't release the biographical information of any of the applicants. And it is determined that the committee will likely vote in closed session, and then they'll release and announce the names of the individuals on the slate that'll be submitted to the governor. Let's see. Is there any questions about that? I mean, just want to make sure the public has wide notice that it will not be getting information, and that essentially until the last meeting probably of this committee in which you'll be releasing those names, that there will be no more public meetings. And finally, the committee is subject to the Maryland Public Ethics Law. The Ethics Commission has advised staff to relay to the members that this is an advisory board. And on the advice of counsel, this committee may choose to file the board's commission ethics law financial disclosure request for exemption form, in which the members of the committee on this committee will not have to file a financial disclosure statement. So I think we haven't given you a copy of the form, but essentially what it just says is, this is the committee, these are the members, this is the purpose. And for this reason, there's no necessity, or there's no reason why the members of this committee would have any sort of conflicts that would require disclosure of your information. Unfortunately for Senator Pinsky, he's still required to file his financial disclosure as a senator, but otherwise the members will not have to file the shorter form. We have included with the public materials a copy of the State Ethics Commission's. There is a memo from October 1, 2017, given to prospective board and commission appointees, which is a partial summary and analysis of their ethics laws requirements. And there is some explanation here about when a member might have to recuse because they have a conflict with their day job, with the responsibilities given to committee members, whether their employment or ownership interests, lobbyists serving on boards and commissions, misusing positions, confidentiality, procurement, and financial disclosure. The secondary purpose of giving the committee members this memo is for them to consider those issues when evaluating candidates for nomination to the Accountability and Implementation Board. Does anybody have any questions?
So we have to decide what, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, go ahead.
No, please.
So we have to decide who would take the Open Meetings Act training if is it available to others besides one person?
It's available to any, if you all wish to take it, all of you can take it. But that's completely up to you. But the law does require at least one member of the committee take the Open Meetings Act training, and that person should be present. I mean, there's procedures in case that individual is not available and at the meeting, and we have that all covered as well.
Stacy, does that include staff? I mean, have you or Rachel taken it?
It says member of the committee. I actually have not taken it.
I haven't.
I read a lot about it.
But I'm actually we're thinking about taking it with whoever takes it. And I believe the suggestion is that the chair of the entity should take the training, but it doesn't have to be the chair.
You know how long that training is?
I really don't. I don't think it's probably more than an hour at the most. I mean, those types of training generally fall within those parameters.
I'm willing to take the training, but if it should be the chair, that's up to the chair, but I'm also willing to do the training.
Okay.
I can also be a backup because I feel like I might have taken it, but I don't remember being on the Commission on Aging. So.
Well, I believe in checks and balances. I'll be a third if you would, but happy to have Ms. Ghost and Dr. Lee take the training. Keep me honest.
And I would say Ms. Goodman and Ms. Heiss are somewhat familiar with open meetings rules and laws, so they can provide backup if we're going astray.
Wonderful.
I'm being advised that it is about an hour long. So.
Okay.
Is there any further action that we need on these items?
You may wish to vote to decide to waive filing the financial disclosure.
Right. And to be clear, Senator Pinsky, I'm sorry, Senator, please.
Yeah, look, we have to do it as legislators. We have to get it in every year. It does take some time. It's your financial holdings. And for legislators, it's to make sure there's no conflict of interest. Clearly, there's no remuneration coming to nominating committee members, or I don't think there's any financial benefit. So unless you really want to spend a few hours going through your financials, I would suggest that you do the short form. I've already done it, so I'm already covered.
So this would waive it. You wouldn't have to file anything, even the short form. So unless you really, really want to disclose.
I will entertain a motion to request the exemption for the ethics law financial disclosure.
Second.
Dr. Lee, would you mind making the motion?
Oh, I move that we approve the waiver of the long or short form of the ethics filing.
Better said than I. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Root. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes. Thank you.
And just to be clear, what you voted on was to file a request for an exemption. It will be up to the State Ethics Commission whether or not to approve it. And then I think they have 30 days. And if they don't approve it, then you will have to file.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. All right. So our next order of business has to do with an overview of the role and responsibilities of the AIB and the nominating committee. Again, I believe this is best articulated by staff, if that's correct. Otherwise, yes, it is. Perfect.
Yes, and Rachel Heiss with the Department of Legislative Services. If we can share the screen again, it starts on page 11 of your materials. And on page 11 is the overview of the Nominating Committee, which you've pretty much covered as part of the bylaws. Bylaws include most of what is in the statute that deals with the Nominating Committee. I will just add that in terms of the slate of nominations submitted to the governor, once the slate is submitted by the committee, the governor has 30 days to make his appointments from the list. And those appointments are subject to advice and consent of the Senate, ultimately. On page 12 is the overview of the Accountability and Implementation Board. And this is a new entity that was created as part of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future legislation. Sorry, my light keeps going out on me. That has it's 7 members, again, appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate. And the main purpose of what we call the AIB is to hold all of the state and local entities accountable for implementing the Blueprint for Maryland's Future with fidelity, and evaluating the outcomes that are achieved over time against the intended outcomes. And there's some more language in the document that, I tried to incorporate. There's many pages of the statute that cover the AIB's purpose and role. So this is not an exhaustive summary, but it does have hopefully all of the highlights. In the middle of page 12, the membership of the AIB is similar to the membership of the Nominating Committee, to the extent practicable, reflect the geographic, racial, ethnic, cultural, and gender diversity of the state collectively, and also collectively have high level of knowledge and expertise in early education, secondary and post-secondary education, teaching in public schools, strategies used by top performing systems around the world, and implementing systemic change in complex organizations, and finally, financial auditing and accounting. So many of those are similar to the requirements for the Nominating Committee. In the case of the AIB, the governor, the Senate president, and the Speaker of the House jointly appoint the chair of the AIB. And members of the board are not entitled to compensation, but are eligible for expense reimbursements. The AIB actually have terms of 6 years, and the initial terms are staggered so that all of the members leave the board at the same time. So 3 would expire in 2024, 2 in 2025, and 2 in 2026. A member of the AIB may be renominated by the Nominating Committee after their term ends. And the AIB was created to monitor and track the implementation of the blueprint. So it has a time limit in statute. It originally was to begin July 1, 2020, and sunset in 2031. The legislation that was passed this past session after the blueprint was enacted added a year to the life of the AIB to make up for the year that was lost at the beginning. So in statute, it expires June 30th, 2032. On page 13 is a summary of the powers and duties of the AIB, and I won't go into it too much. You can all read what is there. There's a lot of information, but it's established as an independent unit of state government. So it is not part of or under any existing agency in the executive branch. That was done purposely so that it could have authority over the state agencies that are implementing pieces of the blueprint, which include, of course, the State Department of Education and the State Board of Education, the Higher Education Commission, the Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce, the Governor's Workforce Investment Board. So the intent of the AIB is to sort of be sort of a level above all of those entities so that it could exercise oversight and accountability over them relative to the blueprint implementation. There was also some language that was added in this past session's chapter 55 that gives the AIB plenary authority over all matters under its jurisdiction. And it specifies that if there's a conflict between the AIB and the decision or a policy of another entity on a matter related to the blueprint, that the AIB's decision will control. There's also a little information about the budget for the AIB. There's mandated funding in the law for the AIB of at least 1.8 million annually, beginning 2022 and annually through fiscal 2032, with an additional 3 million that was provided and mandated, not provided, mandated in 2022 through 2024 to give the board extra funds to provide technical assistance as state and local entities are writing their implementation plans and then beginning to implement them. For fiscal 2022, because of the timing of when the Blueprint for Maryland's Future was enacted, which was in February of this year, the fiscal 22 funding was not, the governor was not required to fund it. At this point, he has not. There is a provision in the sports gaming legislation that provides for funding for the AIB once revenues start to come online from sports betting. That is a little ways off, but certainly sometime in the fiscal year. And then at the bottom of page 13 are the responsibilities of the AIB. And I broke them down into some groupings just to kind of try to organize it a little bit. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but it does try to hit the high points. And so the first category is implementation plans and use of funds. So the first and critical job for the AIB is to develop a comprehensive implementation plan for the blueprint statewide. So implementing all the various policies and requirements over the 12-year implementation period with metrics for timelines and metrics for expected outcomes for state entities and for the local school boards and other local entities involved in the blueprint. And the statute requires the AIB to adopt the initial comprehensive implementation plan by February 15th of 2022. And then after that, the various state entities and local school systems and other entities will then work on their local implementation plans that are aligned with the statewide comprehensive implementation plan. And all of those individual implementation plans are due to the AIB by June 15th of 2022. And the AIB then would review and either approve them or request changes to them, and in an iterative process until the plans are approvable. The AIB is also tasked with providing technical assistance to school systems and the other state entities. I'm on page 14 now. And approving the criteria that the State Department of Education will use to recommend whether the AIB should approve a school system implementation plan. So it's sort of a process where MSDE would be kind of simultaneously, I would say, reviewing the school system implementation plans, and they will then make a recommendation to the AIB about whether they think it's approvable or changes are needed. And then the AIB would take that into consideration, but would also have the advice of their own staff and other information in making the final decision. And of course, then once those plans have all been adopted, the AIB's major responsibility is monitoring the implementation of all of the various pieces of the blueprint by all of the various entities. And then in terms of use of funds, the AIB also has the authority to withhold or release funding annually for school systems based on their the approvability of their plan and then the implementation of their plans. And they are required to develop an appeal process for that. And they are also tasked with reviewing the use of state and other funds to implement the blueprint by not just school systems, but the other entities in the state that are implementing the blueprint. The next section is on oversight and training, which I think
Rachel,
is, yes.
Madam Chair, if I could, just for the committee members and the people following, while a lot of the program is K through 12, there are significant portions of higher education that are affected. The blueprint calls for changes in practices in teacher prep programs, for example. So it goes beyond K to 12. That's why Rachel and Stacy are talking about, and other elements as well. So there are other bodies within the state that are affected by this, not just K to 12. Thank you.
Thank you, and absolutely, exactly. Including teacher preparation programs, which is a big piece of it. So on oversight and training, I think that's fairly straightforward there, so I won't go into that in any detail. I will just point out there's something called a Career and Technical Education Committee that was also created as part of the blueprint. That committee is within the Department of Labor. But it's a new entity that will be coordinating career and technical education programs from secondary, post-secondary, and also into the workforce with apprenticeships and workplace experiences. And the AIB has oversight over that new committee as well. And then, of course, a very major part of the AIB's responsibility is to evaluate the outcomes that are being achieved under the blueprint, collecting and analyzing data to measure progress, disaggregated data to make sure that we're, one of the key goals of the blueprint is to close achievement gaps among different groups of students and hopefully eliminate them. And they're also monitoring and reporting on and evaluating the performance of various aspects of the blueprint. I gave some examples on page 15, including monitoring and reviewing the performance of teacher preparation programs, in consultation with the Longitudinal Data System Center, evaluating the effectiveness of efforts to increase diversity in our teacher preparation programs and in our teaching force in the schools. This is an initiative that has been, that started a few years ago as part of one of the earlier pieces of legislation to implement the Kerwin Commission recommendations, the preliminary recommendations. And there's a whole list there. And again, not exhaustive, but monitoring concentration of poverty in schools and the community school model that is being implemented as part of the new concentration of poverty funding. Of course, implementation of full day kindergarten for 4-year-olds and then moving into low-income 3-year-olds. The number of teachers participating in the career lab, the new career ladder, and pursuing and achieving national board certification. These are all examples of the kind of performance evaluation that the AIB will be doing. And then they also are required to submit an annual report each year to the governor and the General Assembly, sort of summarizing the progress that has been made each year and sort of along the way at that point. And I think critically recommending if changes are needed, legislative or other types of changes are needed to keep the implementation of the blueprint on track. And then, and finally, no, not finally, sorry. There is a requirement in the statute that the AIB contract with a public or private entity to conduct 2 essentially program evaluations of the blueprint implementation. The first evaluation is due in December of 2024, and then the second evaluation is due in December of 2030, and the 2030 report is then intended to include recommendations about whether the AIB should continue to exist or whether some of its responsibilities should be transferred to other entities and what that would look like. And all of that would be in that 2030 report. Then on the page 16, there's also many places in the blueprint statute where the AIB is either where entities are required to either consult, collaborate, coordinate with the AIB for various pieces of the implementation of the blueprint. And so I put, there are some of them are listed there on page 16. But again, it's not an exhaustive list, but what the first one there is the Kerwin Commission had recommended that Maryland begin to participate in the program for international student assessment, or PISA as it's known, participate in that as a state so that we can measure our, sort of get a baseline and then monitor over time how our students compare to students around the world in terms of performance. And I think I'll leave it there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was complex and very clear. Are there any questions from the committee about the charge of the AIB? Yes.
I just was noticing that there was an amendment, I don't know what you call it, a subsequent statute, and it added to the AIB task to provide outreach and educational materials to parents, students, and members of the public on the blueprint. I thought that was interesting to tag that on to the AIB's work. I suppose staff is going to be very busy doing that and pulling that together for their review. So I didn't know if that needed to be added as a separate category.
It actually, it is on page 14.
Okay.
Training, the third bullet.
Okay, I missed that. And then the only other comment I had is on the second paragraph. It says the board must strive to provide equal access to high quality education with equitable outcomes. But when I went back to the legislation, it says the board shall. So I don't know how important it is to be faithful to the legislation, but there can be a difference in the words shall and must. I think some people treat must as a requirement and shall is a little more ambiguous, like just striving to do that and make best effort. So I was just bringing that up as something that was not consistent with the statute that was passed. Perhaps Senator Pinsky has an opinion.
Staff is, they can explain, but I think shall has the force of requirement, but I'm not an attorney, so I defer to others.
In statutory construction, when the law says shall, it means must. We just put must in the statute. So I just, because people understand must a little, it's clearer than shall, I think, in the non-legislative world. So I used must, but in this case, they're interchangeable.
Okay, if there's no preference, I would prefer shall, only because this phrase about equitable outcomes is contentious and a lot of people define it differently. I think equitable access is much more accepted, but equitable outcomes where it suggests everybody getting the same regardless of merit comes up. So that's why I would propose to use the language that's in the legislation.
Ms. Post.
If I'm correct, this is just a summary of what is in the legislation, and we can add a link to the actual statute where people can read the many pages of the bill. So Rose, I understand your point, but I just think this is just a summary put forward. It's not like a bylaw. It's not the actual law. I mean, ultimately, every word in the law is what the AIB will be responsible for following through. So I think it'll be important for folks to just read the law. I do have another question about the AIB money. I should know this, but I unfortunately, the money that's been set aside, the 1.8, and then the additional $3 million to help with technical assistance, does that money also go to pay for the review teams that'll go out and do the monitoring, or is that in a separate bucket of money?
The expert review teams are a separate bucket of money, to use your wording there. They would have a separate appropriation to the State Department of Education, which is responsible for managing the expert review teams. And there is funding, again, provided. The intent is that the expert review team, that MSD would begin to pull the expert review teams together in fiscal 22. But again, no funding has actually been appropriated for that in the fiscal 22 budget. But the legislature did provide for some funding, I think $1.1 million for expert review teams, again, from the sport betting revenues as they come in. And so there's sort of the first call, for lack of a better word, on those sports betting revenues is the AIB appropriation. And then it moves down into other pieces of implementation of the blueprint that, based on the Commission's recommendations and the fiscal note for the legislation, the amount of funding that would be needed to fund those various aspects. It also includes funding for the State Department of Education to start doing more work on aligning the curriculum across grades, and funding for the CTE committee to begin operating. So there's sort of a list of items. We can provide that to you if you like it.
No, I appreciate that explanation. One other follow-up is, do you know, you can send me to a link to find this, is there a requirement of the State Department to seek current educators and practitioners to be part of those review teams? And you can follow up if you don't know right now, but
I can double check. Let me follow up with you on that. It definitely requires them to use master teach when the career ladder is fully implemented, or to use master teachers at the master level to serve on expert review teams, as well as the master principals. I need to double check on current teachers.
I just think it shows the great responsibility of the people that we're going to put in place to monitor all of this and oversee the moving parts. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Lee.
I just wanted to go back to this document. I guess I was thinking this is the document we would be providing to candidates so that they could see what are their responsibilities. And I guess I just advocate to make our documents as accurate as possible and not be sloppy about, because they're going to get sent and distributed and perpetuated. And if it's not accurate, I'd rather not have these things get out there and be propagated if we already know from the beginning that there could be some tweaks that could make them more.
As the author of this document, I'm happy to change it to shall. I just want to clear with you that you're making a distinction between shall and must that doesn't exist in this context. Shall in the statute means that the board is required to strive to provide equal access with equitable outcomes. So
Okay.
Meaning of a requirement. There's no gray. But
Okay,
I'm happy to change it if you think.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, wonderful. We are moving right along. So I think the next item, and there's no action for the committee on that review. It was just for the benefit of the public, and our general reminder is to talk about the application itself for the board, as well as the timeline. And again, I think that's Ms. Heiss.
Yes. So we have not provided for the public meeting materials a copy of the draft application at this time, in part to avoid potentially having multiple versions of the application sort of out there in the internet world, and potentially someone using the wrong one. So what I thought I would do is just briefly go through sort of but you all do have a copy. It was in your meeting materials. And I thought I would just briefly go through the kind of the not in specific detail, but sort of the groupings on the application. And so obviously the application includes contact information, the person who's applying. And I think one of the important things to point out is that anyone who wishes to be considered as a potential candidate for nomination must submit the applications themselves. There will be information posted on the committee's website, a page that sort of describes the process for applying and has the links and all this very explicit instructions, so that if anyone from the committee, from the public, wishes to has people in mind that they want to consider applying, that they could send that to those individuals. But ultimately that the individuals will need to proactively fill out the application and also submit a resume and apply to the committee in order to be considered. And the timing of that is that the applications will be posted on the committee's website on Monday, July 12th. It will be available for downloading, and it could even be submitted on July 12th if someone is that timely. And it will be open until Wednesday, August 4th. So anyone who wishes to apply and provide that by midnight on August 4th, they will be considered. Staff will be monitoring the email address, which is where all applications must be sent, and doing a quick review to make sure, all the required places are filled in and that we receive the resume, and then providing either a confirmation email or letting folks know that they need, that they missed something. So staff will be doing that. The goal, I think, the plan, I should say, is then for the members of the committee to consider the applications over the rest of the summer, and hopefully complete your work by the middle of September. And specifically on the application itself, it is modeled on the application that the governor's office uses for appointments to boards and commissions. It is not identical, but it is very similar in many ways. So there are a number of questions about convictions or charges, violations of law, financial delinquencies or bankruptcies, other litigation, citations, complaints of discrimination, and also whether the person is aware of any potential conflicts of interest between essentially their day job or their personal affiliations and the AIB's responsibilities and oversight. And that goes to the point that Stacy made earlier regarding the memo from the Ethics Commission, and that conflicts of interest they're very individual fact specific in terms of determining whether there is a conflict or not. But it is something that as you're considering applicants, you'll want to consider. Applicants can recuse themselves to satisfy a conflict. So it doesn't mean that if there is a conflict that it means that a person couldn't serve. Although at some point there could be a consideration that if a person has to recuse themselves from so much of the business of the AIB, then it might become a concern. Also, as I said earlier, the statute requires collectively the members of the AIB to meet the, for lack of a better word, I'll say demographic kind of requirements of cultural, racial, ethnic diversity, geographic diversity, as well as those subject matter areas of expertise. So there is a question about both expertise that a person holds and also some demographics questions that are optional for applicants to choose whether to provide that information or not, but it would be helpful in you fulfilling your charge. And then there is what we are calling the essay question. And that is just really an opportunity for applicants to tell the nominating committee, why they want to serve on the board and what they think they can bring to the board's work. And then there is an affirmation section, which is essentially, by submitting the application, the individual is affirming that they, to the best of their knowledge and belief, all the information they're providing is accurate, and consenting to reasonable inquiry into their background, as well as letting them know that, as Stacy also described earlier, all of the information provided in the application include everything, and the resume that they also submit, and any other information that is requested is all confidential and will not be disclosed publicly at any time. And then, as I said, they do need to attach a resume to the email that, and there's specific items that have to be included in the resume: education, work experience, professional licenses, other appointments and honors, and then professional and personal affiliations, sort of with organizations or clubs or things like that. So the application itself is 5 pages, so it's not terribly long, and the resume is limited to 3 pages. And then references are not required upon application. That would be something that could be requested by the committee as the process moves along. And just checking my list here. I think I covered everything. Again, happy to answer questions or turn it back over to the chair for discussion.
Ms. Bost had a question.
I just want to be clear on the conflict of interest for AIB members. So there's no blanket conflict with if they're a local government employee or state employee. It would be an individual basis based on their job and how connected they are to the work of the AIB. And is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah, I think you summarized that well.
Right. So the Ethics Commission, I spoke to them a little bit about this question, and essentially is the state or local position inconsistent with another state position? So have the duties related to the work of the board, are they, for example, if they're say a liaison from a local government and you're considering that person to be on the board, are their duties with that full-time position going to work with the oversight of the AIB of locals? Those are the kind of things that you want to consider.
Yes, Senator Pinsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 questions. Let me follow up on the conflict. Are there any explicit areas, for example, if you work for a school system who actually receives money from the state through the AIB, or say a local board of education, are they excluded by its very nature, or is that a case by case? I mean, I think a lot of people are going to be confused by the question of conflict. It seems a little too ambiguous when I saw that. Somebody who does public policy, a think tank, they might want to think twice. It would seem to me it's not a conflict. So is there any way we can clarify the parameters a little bit? Because I think you're going to get plenty of follow-up questions, because there are going to be many of them in the education sphere, and they're going to be wondering, is this a conflict or not? So I think the clearer we can be, the less staff is going to have to answer questions. So that's my first question. Then I have a second, but I'll stop.
I will say it's a nuance. The ethics law is very nuanced. There's general parameters and then fact-specific inquiry. You can request that we get advice from the Ethics Commission. We can compose some questions and ask for some formal advice to be given. That's perfectly permissible. And if you would like a better inquiry, especially to people who hold positions on boards of education or whatnot, we're happy to put that forth for you.
Madam Chair, if we are given any enlightenment on this, I think it might help the application. If we can't, we can't. But I think it's worth asking the Ethics Commission.
I will say, I don't think you'll get this in time for this opening on Monday. But.
Okay. Well, we can always postpone it a day, but whatever the will of the group is. The second point, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
I just want to make sure that I understand the concern. Is it that we just need a ruling on what constitutes the conflict of interest, or is there something in the current language that would, is it the current language that would cause the delay? Because where I'm going with this is that if we're just waiting for an opinion, I think we can post the application without the opinion. Okay. Make sure I'm following the question.
Fine.
Is that fine? Is that okay?
Yeah, I just think, I don't know if it's a political question or an ethical question of what in fact will constitute a conflict. And I think when people call the office or call the staff, they're going to be scratching their heads a little bit. So I think that the more clarification going forward, we can tell people this will be a conflict or not, the more informed we'll be. That's all. It may be not a major issue. It just came to mind. But let me move to the second one.
If it's all right, if I can just add, the question in the application is fairly broad because it is such a nuanced issue. And I don't know if that's why Senator Pinsky was hoping we could maybe narrow down the question. I feel like right now we can't, but as Stacy suggested, we can post as we get responses from, we can sort of, I think maybe what would make sense is to kind of do Q&A and post some hypotheticals, pose those to the Ethics Commission, and then we can take their answer and we can take Q&A and post that on the website as soon as we have information, so that to help folks with sort of answering that question about a potential conflict of interest. But ultimately, I think it will be something as you're narrowing down the that you would, discuss specifically either with them or potentially with the Ethics Commission.
Okay.
Can I get in here a moment? I think Senator Pinsky has an extremely important point. Anybody who is currently involved in public education in the state of Maryland, from teacher all the way up through the Board of Education, the local Board of Education, would be affected by the policies and procedures put in by the AIB. So if they are voting on the policies and procedures which affect them, that would seem to be a conflict. On the other hand, if you look at what they're trying to find a way of areas of expertise, early childhood through secondary education, and I think the key word there is policy, and then the second one, post-secondary education policy, that implies people who are operating at a relatively high level. Teaching in the public schools, probably again, somebody who is at a policy level. Strategies and so on. And there's only one way you get that experience. You have to have worked at something that is in education at a level. There's no other way to get that kind of experience. So the question may be currently employed, previously employed, or perhaps people who are at a level where they won't be affected by this. I'm sorry, Senator, you had a question.
Well, it's on a separate issue. I just wanted to mention that we may want to add near the front of the or top of the application that the nominating committee will not make their name public unless it's one of the names forwarded to the governor. I mean, a lot of people, if that's our policy, which I think it should be, because I think it would make people reticent to join, I think we should make that up front so people can feel fairly confident that if they seek interest and are not accepted, that it won't be bandied about, even though it's not a full-time job. People can take it personally and see it as a slight. I think having some disclaimer, a one-sentence disclaimer near the top might be helpful. That's all.
I just have one other thing that I think might be useful as we start sifting through resumes and applications. On page 3 of the application, we have the areas of expertise that are listed in the law. But unless that's really clearly obvious from the resume they submit, and having a lot of experience with resumes, it may not be. I think we ought to put a line or two there, not anything lengthy, but perhaps a line or two for them to tell us something that they, how they got the experience or the expertise in each area, or what they did to give them the expertise or shows the expertise. Because all right now they're doing is checking a box. I'm not sure that tells me enough that I want to know.
Ms. Most?
Yeah, 2 points on this. One, I think also when we look at education employees, there are some that have impact on direct decision-making of the funds and the programs, and others that don't, but would bring practitioner expertise to the table. So I think that is a different nuance that isn't there. So if I'm sorry, Francesca, we could use the principal. If I'm a principal, I have great knowledge, but I don't actually make the decision on how much money my school gets, what program my school gets. So it's a difference between the practitioner knowledge and information versus I'm a decision maker. I'm the superintendent, or I'm the chair of the school board versus those conflicts. So I think we have to look at that nuance. And Dr. Root, to your point, one of the things that I wanted to look at was a possibly short form answer to, and the wording could be different each way, but what will make you a good member of the AIB? I was just trying to get at what of that list of expertise is really your forte that'll make you an important member of this AIB, somehow worded in a very brief box of information.
Are there other comments or questions? So just for my benefit, I just want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of the issues that we want to address with the application. I'm going to try to repeat what I heard. The first is the question about getting an opinion from the Ethics Commission about what constitutes a conflict of interest. But we do not believe that prevents us from posting the application according to schedule. If I'm mistaken, please correct me. The second item has to do with how we make reference in the application to which of the areas of expertise the candidate believes he or she falls under. And the third is how your areas of expertise, your background contributes to the work of the AIB. I'm not suggesting that all of those are incorporated in exactly the way that I articulated it, but I just want to make sure that those are the issues that we are grappling with. Is that right?
I think that was a good summary.
Dr. Lee?
I had raised another issue that wasn't brought up, so I don't know if this is the list, but the issue about being a Maryland resident, I just wanted to make it clear, because that might be a question. Hey, can I come, can I apply if I don't live in Maryland? So I think we should decide if we're going to say Maryland resident preferred but not required. I don't have a bias on this. I just want to put it out there that we probably want to come to some agreement on that.
I'm more on the required. I think if somebody is a taxpayer and living in this state, they have more of a vested interest in helping us to make our school systems better with the help of the blueprint.
Would there ever be a case that somebody has experience with Maryland, raised their kids in Maryland, and then now lives somewhere else that might be interested? I don't have anyone in mind. I'm just saying if that's a possibility, I always like to keep my options open. So maybe it's good enough to say we prefer it, but we would entertain specific cases where they make a convincing case that they're very familiar or they work or have had work experience with the Maryland school system.
Madam Chair, that seems to be a policy question that we should either vote up or vote down, it seems to me.
Yeah, I'm absorbing it. Are there any other questions or comments about it? And just so that we're clear, we would want the person to be a legal resident of the state of Maryland. So not spend 6 months in another part of the country and another 6 months, but legally, where do you file your state taxes? Okay, so that, just so that I understand exactly what the issue is. Okay, so is there a motion? I didn't make the motion, but is there a motion to make a Maryland state residency requirement for all candidates?
Can I move to have the Maryland residency be preferred,
Of course you can move,
but not required? And then I'll see if you all vote that down.
Is there a second?
Okay, well that solves that problem.
I move it's required as a part of the application process, residency.
Is there a second? Was there a second to? I see. Senator Pinsky seconds the motion that Maryland residency is a requirement for all candidates submitted on the slate. Are there any further comments or questions? I must say I'm fascinated by the proposition. So that's what I'm just sort of pausing about. All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed?
I'll oppose.
One with 5 in favor, 1 against, the motion carries. Can I just ask a question that the birdie on my shoulder just raised by the name of Rachel Heiss? If someone is an undocumented resident, would they be precluded? As you all think about it, my suggestion is sometimes silence is better than making a decision. But if there's a strong feeling, then that way you get the case-by-case basis. But if there's a strong feeling, happy to entertain it. Yes, Dr. Lee.
I would move that it be a legal resident of Maryland.
Is there?
Can I ask a question? I'll wait to see if there's a second. I just had a question.
Yeah. Is there a second to Dr. Lee's motion? A legal resident of Maryland.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Dr. Root. Are there any other comments or questions regarding the motion?
I do. I guess I would ask our staff, is there past practice for commissions and boards in the state of wording that fits this piece that we're talking about?
I don't know specifically that question, but for example, for a county board of education, it requires a person to be a registered voter. If you are not a legal resident, you cannot be a registered voter, as the law precludes that. So I think that is kind of I mean, it's not exactly the answer to the question, but that's something to think about.
Yeah, Dr. Sauls, Madam Chair, a minute ago you said leaving it at resident, sometimes it's better just to not be silent, but use the term that first came to mind as resident. And I'm very comfortable with that. I think this adds other politically charged things into this process. And I think your inclination initially of just being relatively silent, of saying a Maryland resident suffices on those counts. So I'll probably be voting against the motion.
Yes, Dr. Lee.
I guess I just want to point out that it seems to me an inconsistency that the members of the AIB are going to be determining how tax money are spent. And that seems like something that people that are legally in Maryland are paying taxes. I don't know what the details and the politics, but I feel that if it's trying to be accountable for how tax money are spent, then it seems to me that it should be people who are legally able to vote and have been paying taxes.
Ms. Bost?
I first think that the term would be documented and undocumented is the proper term that we should be referring to versus legal and illegal. And undocumented residents also pay taxes into the state. So I just want us to be accurately reflecting the folks that we're talking about, and it's documented or undocumented, and they also do pay taxes into the state.
Thank you. Dr. Root.
I'm having difficulty imagining somebody who isn't in this country legally having the qualifications and the courage to apply for a position on this board. And as Stacy pointed out, I've served on the local board. I had to testify to the effect that I was a legal citizen of Allegheny County to serve on that board. I can't imagine we would ask for less at the state level.
Just so that I'm clear before we call for the vote, right now as it stands, we're requiring that people are residents of the state of Maryland. Is that the language?
Right, legally reside in the state.
But right, residents of the state of Maryland. Okay, perfect. So
full-time, right? Didn't we say full-time? They can't be 6 months here, 6 months in Florida, or can they?
The motion was to be a resident of Maryland. That was the motion. And then Dr. Lee made a motion to modify that to be legal residency. That was the motion.
Madam Chair, Dr. Souls, if I may, it says on the application already, it asks whether or not you are a U.S. citizen. So I'm not quite sure what the question is at this point.
That is an optional question. So they're not required to answer any of those questions in the demographics section.
And so are we as a committee asking that this question not be optional?
So being a citizen versus being a resident, my understanding is that it would remain optional. Are there any other questions and concerns? This has actually been illuminating in many ways. But if there are no other comments or questions, I think we should call the vote. All those in favor of the motion to add legal Maryland residents to the requirements for all applicants and candidates, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
No.
Nay.
Nay. Are there any abstentions? Okay, so the motion fails. I don't have an exact count. I counted 1 in favor of the motion and 4 against. Dr. Lee, I don't think I noted your 2. Okay, 2 in favor.
She was muted.
4 against. Got it. Thank you. The motion fails. All right. So what are our next steps in terms of the feedback that we have on the 3 issues raised regarding the application? That's a question for staff, I think.
You're muted, Rachel.
Thank you. Has to be said in every meeting, at least once. I think what staff can do is make the changes that you've discussed. We can, so I'll just kind of go through them. We're going to add to the page 1 of the application, letting folks know that their names will not be made public, or no information contained in the application will be made public unless they are selected to be nominated by the committee. On page 3, in the areas of expertise, my thought would be to add a space below where they check off and ask them to please describe what education and experience they have in the fields that they have checked in the areas of expertise. And then we could also, to Ms. Bose's point, ask them to indicate, how they feel that expertise will contribute to the work of the AIB, and just sort of put a text box in for them to fill in, if that is acceptable.
Let me offer, I mean, in terms of adding that line below the check box, can we say if it's not reflected in the resume? I mean, I don't want them to have to do work twice. In other words, if it's very obvious in their resume that they've held leadership positions in higher education or whatever it might be, they shouldn't have to write it again. I think Dr. Root earlier, about an hour ago, talked about things that were not reflected in the resume. So I want to make this as easy as possible. We don't want to scare people away from completing the form.
I agree with that.
Okay. And then what about asking them to describe how their expertise will contribute to the AIB? Do we want to do that?
Yeah, I support Cheryl Bose's suggestion that we be a little more precise and not just say, why are you interested, but why do you feel you would make a contribution to the AIB? I thought that was a good suggestion.
So then like less than 100 words or less, I think.
So let me just, to be clear, are you talking about changing the essay question?
Yes, I was talking about change, because I don't like to overburden people. If you're just trying to get at what is it that they think that they would contribute, that's why they're interested. I think it takes care of both questions. I wouldn't want them to have to fill out more than one essay question.
I agree, Dr. Lee.
I agree. I think that works.
Okay. Okay, and then we'll be adding to the front, I think we would be adding a statement that Maryland residency is required for a candidate. Trying to think of how we would. Maybe we'll have them have to fill in state, and it has to say Maryland, essentially. I don't know if you, again, I guess we would ask. I guess we need to ask the question, are you a resident of Maryland? Actually, I think that's probably what we need to do.
Yes, Dr. Lee?
I thought we voted to make that a requirement. So isn't that just part of the eligibility? You must be a resident of Maryland to even apply.
Right, but we still, I think you would want them to
state their address, because then you already asked their address. So
just because you live in Maryland does not mean you are necessarily mean that you're a resident of the state, but whatever you all want, whatever level of information you all want.
I think asking your question in there, Rachel, fits. Are you a resident? And then they put that in there. I mean, we can put on there required.
Yeah.
Perfect. Are there any other items in terms of next steps related to the application that we need to review?
We need a motion to approve the application.
Do we? Sure. Yes.
I'll move.
Thank you. Is there a second to approve the application?
Second.
Seconded by Senator Pinsky. Is there any further comments or questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Right, 6 in favor, none against. The motion passes. Okay, there are a couple of other items that we need to review. One is to talk briefly about public participation. As Ms. Goodman made us all aware, as an advisory committee, according to statute, we are subject to the Open Meetings Act and Public Information Act. And we also should take public and will take public participation. Due to the nature of our work, much of the work will take place in closed session in order to protect the privacy and confidentiality of the applicants, and also often to receive the advice of counsel, both of which are legal reasons for which we would take a meeting in closed session. That said, we do want input from the public. The best way to do that is to send an email to our AIBNC, alphabet soup email, which is AIB Nominating Committee at mlis.state.md.us, which I believe is posted and publicly available. I see staff nods that is correct. So please submit public comments to that email. Staff will ensure that all public comments are forwarded to every single member of the committee. And just as a reminder, if you want certainty that your public comment was registered, your best bet is to send it to that email versus to individual email if you want it registered as public comment. We want to thank you for allowing us to figure out how to navigate this brave new world of honoring the spirit and the letter of the law, while also being safe, managing the fact that we're all in different places and that we're under a very truncated timeline. So that is going to be, again, our mechanism for public participation, to please send your comments to that email for proper registry. Is there anything else that I need to say on that matter, Ms. Goodman? Okay, perfect. And then finally, we will meet in executive session, formally closed session, in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. It was posted previously that for this committee, we would meet partly in public and also in closed session. Is that correct? So public has been made aware. So I am going to entertain, well, first I'm going to say a couple of things. I'm going to entertain a motion to close this meeting and to adjourn to closed session in order to receive the advice of counsel. That's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing I want to say, if memory serves, we also have to publicly announce our future intentions to meet in closed session in order to review applications, which we have to do so under privacy and confidentiality. So that will be done also in closed session. Do we need to have that motion now, or can we wait until later for the second part?
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Before we take those two motions, I think we need to reiterate something that was said to the public. And that is, we appreciate they might have advice for people who might make great members of the AIB, but they can't submit for them. And that I think what we agreed to earlier was that any interested party had to submit it themselves. So if someone does have a recommendation out there, they should forward the link from the website to that individual. We want to simplify this. Some people's name might come up from a third party and they're not interested, and it gets very complicated. So we want to be efficient and fair to everyone. So I think we need to underline that to the public who may be watching us at the present time. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
No, that's a very good point. Thank you, Senator. Are there any other closing points before we move to closed session? Yes, Ms. Heiss, I need help.
We do have something written that addresses for the motion to go into closed session that addresses both of the points that you brought up, Madam Chair. And if I can share my screen, which I think I can. Can everyone see that? Let me close this. There.
Perfect. So this is what I'm to read and then to accept the motion to adjourn to closed session?
Exactly. exactly.
Perfect. In accordance with Section 3-305B1 of the General Provisions Article, the remainder of this meeting of the Accountability and Implementation Board Nominating Committee will be closed only to discuss the appointment of individuals over whom this public body has jurisdiction and any other personnel matter that affects one or more specific individuals. Further, it is the intent of the committee to provide notice to the public that the vote taken today to close the remainder of this meeting is a vote to close future meetings of the committee in August and early September to be announced at a later date. Under Section 3-305B1 of the General Provisions Article for the same purpose as previously described. Each of these meetings will be posted in advance on the Maryland General Assembly hearing schedule. With that, I will entertain a motion to accept.
I move.
Second.
Those seconded by Dr. Root. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, our meeting is adjourned and we will move to closed session. Thank you all so much.